I'm writing a history of the world, and in the process, my own. First lines matter, and what a start to Penelope Lively's Moon Tiger. Less a first line and more a provocation. A challenge. Claudia Hampton, a best-selling novelist and historian, lays dying on her bed in hospital, alone, and she decides to throw this final challenge at life. To go out writing. And sure, the nurses may be condescending and dismissive. Sure, they may shake their heads at her and say, oh yes, she certainly was someone back in the day, but now she's just another rambling young woman. But Claudia Hampton knows. She has written her whole life, and she will write until the very end. She is set on presenting her own version of the world. And what a powerful thing to reclaim your story in a world that's determined to take your life away, to tell your life as you know it, the way that you see it, as rich and vivid in rich and vivid prose, almost as rich and vivid as the prose, but not quite, about the sultry afternoons in Cairo, about the horrors of being a war correspondent, about the heart-wrenching, shattering grief of losing someone, of failed motherhood, of a somewhat successful motherhood, of a string of rivalry against yourself, against a brother. Claudia is certainly a personality, and this is felt very much in the first line, because she is as arrogant, as enduring, as obstinate as she is magnetic, charming, selfish, yes, egotistical, yes, but someone you can't tear your eyes away from. Utterly refreshing to read about a character who's so principled in their own way, who has no regrets, who lives in their own version of morality, who is frankly a bully, a poor mother who abandons her child because she thinks that she's dull and uninteresting, and she's mean to her brother's wife, and she's dismissive and brushes off everybody around her that she doesn't find remotely interesting, and she's condescending, sure, but she's also deeply intelligent, delightfully so, and she's riveting in her movements and self-assuredness. Confidence attracts, even if arrogance repels. And Claudia knows that she's beautiful, and she also knows that she just does not care. She takes advantage of life when opportunities come her way, but neither is she particularly determined to be a cause for someone. She's determined to live life as she sees fit, what other people would term in a manly way. Perhaps that's why men are attracted by her, but soon realize that a relationship with her is not for them, because she would never settle to being subordinate. And that's why perhaps women don't get her, because she just sets out and claims space the way that a man would, but at the same time she writes in a way that is distinctly feminine, and she explicitly says that she's sure that feminism would use her as a cause, because here she is, a war correspondent, a woman in a man's world, yada yada yada. But no, she's not doing this for a cause, she's not doing this to prove something against her gender or because of her gender. This is a minor tangent to her story. She's doing this because she has always been driven by herself and by her story, and that's why she fully acknowledges that she ain't no gift for anyone. But then again, neither is it somebody's birthday party, so she does not need to be a gift. If anything, this is a celebration. Excuse my poorly crafted metaphors. If anything, this is a celebration of herself, as you can tell by the history of the world, with all the due arrogance of a celebration of herself. And there's something in this that is so human and such a breath of fresh air in the way that she approaches life. Because she just does things, and she does things as she sees fit. And she acknowledges that, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't have done that, and yeah, sure, I'm a horrible human being, but she explicitly says, no regrets. Regrets are, I have this quote somewhere, but it's gonna take a while to find because there are just so many. Okay, as a side note about my little system, orange is for moments of incredibly beautiful writing that I would love to come back to again and again. Pink are for important quotes. Blue, moments which resonated with me, and green, Moon Tiger. Unexpected system, usually I'm a bit more organized than that, a bit more specific. Plot, characters, whatever. But with Moon Tiger, it so completely and utterly immerses you that you find yourself alone with the book and alone with Claudia, which is why I think that it's so important for me that Claudia is just so honest and so raw and so human as a character. She's neither, there's no attempt to portray her as good as bad. She just is. Except, I said that this is an arrogant celebration of oneself, but Penelope Lively does something incredible. She introduces the voices of those that Claudia, in her usual style, left on the periphery. Yes, that very same child I talked about that she dismisses as dull and boring, those lovers who she thinks about, oh, terrible idea, but then one thing leads to another and she's like, okay, well, here's another lover, here's another man that I'll never marry but I'll have a child with, right? Or maybe that rivalry with her brother, who she never gives a voice, who she once wishes dead. Penelope Lively gives all of them a voice by weaving their story into Claudia's. And sometimes she tells the story of Claudia from a third person, and sometimes, well, mostly, it's from the first person. And there are these absolutely brilliant shifts in perspective and parallels. It's a parallel upon a parallel, which I deeply love. It's a sentence mirroring another sentence in its structure, going from one thing to another, flowing from one thing to another, often the same page is repeated from a different perspective, and you see the ways in which Claudia sees things, and you understand that that is not quite what reality is, or maybe it is, but it only is like that for her, and you get to see the other perspective, and it adds a beautiful, all-rounded sensation, being somehow within Claudia's mind and yet also outside, seeing the world from her eyes but also from the world's eyes, seeing her. Voices, thoughts, the novel indeed carries a history of the world. Magically so. Melodically, it's a kaleidoscope of images and blurred lines between the imagined, the unimagined, the possibilities, the realities, and it's a history, but it doesn't tell the history linearly. It plays with our very understanding of what history is, of how we expect our story to be told, of how we expect stories to be told, and it plays with our expectations, and it does something, it ironizes them, it does something different with them, but at the same time it shows us things that you would expect. So somehow it makes this mundane life into the universal. But can you even call any life mundane when life is filled with so much heartbreak and happiness and joy and sudden emotions? And indeed, Claudia's story is exactly that. Penelope Lively takes us on a whirlwind tour of Cairo, of London, of America, of trips, childhood trips to beaches to look for fossils, of passionate entanglements, of chance meetings, of career advancements, and somehow all this takes place neither in the present nor in the past. It all at once goes back to the Neolithic period, and then suddenly the Victorian era, and then suddenly it's the modern times, and time ceases to exist. She shows us the moment itself. And looking at the story of her life, you start to realize that maybe the chronology does not matter. The book instead presents you in the moment only with Claudia, sure, but with the prose, the wonderful prose. And how can it be that Claudia is dying? Because surely she will live on in our minds. She bravely sets out to challenge that notion that things are gone, and somehow we believe her crazy plan, because surely this woman can do it all. Surely she can handle things being gone, she who has known so much heartbreak and so much loss, and if she says that things are never truly gone, then they're never truly gone. Crying, not in grief, but in wonder that nothing is ever lost, that everything can be retrieved, that a lifetime is not linear but instant, that inside the head everything happens at once. And critics dismissed this novel when it came out as a housewife's tale, because Claudia somehow manages to very much retain her feminine identity. She often writes in this style that somebody has once termed the feminine plural, something that feels like it's we or they, but it's somehow the experience of all women and not just Claudia. So she retains her distinctly female identity even when in a man's world. But more than that, there has been a tendency to dismiss this as overdone, as another love story set in the war, and of course everything is as expected, it's a war and people die, and oh how romantic, and yeah, it's all been done before. And sure, It has been done before, and even parts of the plot, I will not rebut this assumption in any way. It has been done before. It's another World War novel, but the approach, the structure, the language, the fine observations on beauty and love and the things that matter, these are not things that every book gets. And I'd agree with Penguin 100%. It's a modern classic. I think this is one to pass on to the generations, because this is the kind of fiction that, if you truly allow yourself to think about it and to reflect, these are the kinds of ideas that we should be passing on, the ones that should live on as a modern classic. And all through, with incredible characterization, this novel just captures you and compels you because of its freedom of spirit. And yes, through the characterizations, through the fine observations about personalities in this book, about Claudia, about her free spirit, but more than that, it's a freedom of the prose and of the feeling it conveys. If you have ever been struck by an intellectual pursuit, if you've completely given yourself up to an intellectual pursuit and to an intellectual passion, if you have ever felt consumed by feelings of love or hate or rivalry or observations about yourself, then this is just captured somehow here, that very essence of what it is like to be driven by something, to be so driven by something, so consumed by something that it's almost like you're free at that time, even though you're not technically free, you're constrained by whatever it is consuming you. So if you've ever felt that way, you will feel yourself liberated and acknowledged by the writing in this book. And notice how I keep circling back to the writing of this book. It's not just because in my reviews I try to mirror the atmosphere, the vibe, and there's a lot of circular motions in this. No, it's not just that. It's because Moon Tiger is impossible. When we talk about Moon Tiger, it's impossible not to come back to the writing. I mean, just the parallelisms, the sentences that run into each other, the ellipses, the shift in perspective, even the shift in tone, the shift from a jarring observation that's humorous and witty and makes you think, how does one think like that, to this deeply romantic passage. Penelope Lively has something so unabridged in her freedom of expression. And you know, when I first started this book, maybe I think around this moment or so, I said that this feels very much like Virginia Woolf, this feels very stream of consciousness, because the first few pages are like that. But then you realize, no. You realize that, yes, sure, maybe it's all consumed by the moment, she writes what she sees, but every word is controlled, every word is thought out. It feels like a thought that has been directed. It's more an endless, boundless flight of thought that is controlled, rather than a loss of control and a stream of consciousness. It's something more like consciousness and something more added to that. It's a sense of every word being thought out and every structure carefully layered onto the other in a way that makes you think this book has no structure, but then it clearly does. So funnily enough, it's at once structured and not structured, at once stream of consciousness and not stream of consciousness. And is that not what Claudia is trying to convey in her history of the world? That we're at once in the present and in the past, that time exists and time doesn't exist. And I think that that's a tiny little thing that just, when you catch onto it, and when you catch onto the specific fine moments of how it plays out in the book, is truly a gift to witness. Because yes, these moments of humor and distinctly Claudia wit, right? So how many men have asked you to marry them? Not a lot. Most had too strong an instinct for self-preservations. And then followed up by that, you have phrases that just utterly take your breath away, ones you will not stop thinking about that for days. And is that not, as Lively writes, or maybe as Claudia writes, the power of language? Preserving the ephemeral, giving form to dreams, and permanence to sparks of sunlight. Claudia and Lively blend together well. Here you will find moments, references to Lively's own autobiography growing up in Cairo, which is why perhaps you feel so strongly transported. You almost feel that scorching sun, that endless expanse of desert, that bustle and conversation of multiculturalism that goes on in Cairo. You're directly there. And it's rare to find a book that manages to convey that imagery and that sense so well. And when it does so in something as ambitious, scope-wise, as telling a history of the world in 200 pages, it's a very thin novel, that's a whirlwind feeling indeed. With unbridled ambition, and how incredible to accomplish it and to manage it. I felt consumed and immersed from the very first page to the last. And undoubtedly this is a book which will leave with you a legacy of feelings, emotions, impressions, thoughts, less plot. Character, maybe, but I think it's more about your reaction to the story, the way that you begin to think about it, the way that you begin to process it. This is a book to come back to again and again. A book where maybe you won't remember the fine details of how many lovers she had or however old her child was when whatever else happened, but that's not important. It's the feeling that this book gives. And I think a very important tip when discussing this book is it requires you to let go. It requires you to fall in love with Claudia, who is often an unlikable character, but also fall in love not with her, but with the way that she sees life. And that requires a certain type of mood, I will admit. And for those who will struggle falling over the first few hurdles of reading a woman who's so arrogant and so confident and getting into the first few pages where the writing is maybe not something that you're used to, or maybe something that's not quite your thing, I would advise you to just be patient. Because with this one, I loved it so much, but I'm a bit worried about recommending it to you because I don't know if it will be for you, because I don't know exactly in what state of mind you're watching this. This will be hit or miss. It's just one of these novels. If you allow the process to consume you, if you admire what this book does, and if you let go of your conceptions and prejudices and what you think it should do, and your conception of what this person should be like, and you just let yourself see the beauty, you will find a beauty that is unparalleled, and a beauty like nothing else I've read recently. Already this is one of my favorite books of this year so far. I want to eat this book for breakfast every day. And impressively, more impressively perhaps than my hunger, which is a basic human need, I want to come back to it again and again. I want to reread it at certain stages in my life, and I want to once again just allow myself to be captured and immersed by Penelope Lively's incredible prose. What a novel! I cannot think of a better recommendation. So thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that this will make you pick up what is an underrated modern classic. I have never heard of this up until I participated in a book club about this book. So, Anne Tyler on the back, by the way, says, leaves its traces in the air long after you've put it away. And I don't know how I feel about that, because I don't think it's in the air. I think it's in your very soul and in your very being. So thank you so much for making it this far. Penelope Lively, Moon Tiger, and see you next time.